Good morning. Thank you for joining us. My name is Brendan Bhopal. I'm the program coordinator for Colorado College's State of the Rockies project. For the past year, the Rockies project has focused on the Colorado River Basin and the multitude of issues that surround it. Starting with the continuation of our tradition of student-faculty collaborative research last summer, we identified the basin's issues and reported them in this year's 2012 State of the Rockies report card. During the past fall, we sponsored a speaker series here on campus covering Colorado River Basin issues from environmental perspectives to the implications of a changing climate. Our new addition to this year's project was a field research component in the inclusion of two Rockies project field researchers. Will Stauffer-Norris and Zach Podmore paddled 1,700 miles from the source of the Green River in Wyoming to the imperiled Colorado River Delta in Mexico. They reported from the field on the issues they encountered and the sights they saw. The Rockies project produced a number of videos throughout their trip, and today we'd like to show you the most recent one with Will and Zach in the Delta and at the Morelos Dam on the U.S.-Mexico border.
I'm Will Stauffer-Norris.
And I'm Zach Podmore, and we just spent the last 4 months paddling the Colorado River from source to sea.
So we're just sitting here at the Morelos Dam where the river pretty much effectively ends. It's this pretty powerful image of one side of the dam, filled up with water, and the other side there's just a trickle coming out.
What's the estuary habitat look like, where it actually meets the sea?
The river, the Colorado River, is completely dry from a little ways down from this dam here. And then in places where the groundwater is close enough to the surface, there's a few little remnants of the river. And then the Rio Hardy, which is basically a wastewater runoff stream, joins the Colorado, and so there's a little bit of water in the riverbed. So there actually is a little bit of water where it meets the ocean, but it was not much. It was actually too shallow for us to paddle through. So we ended up slogging through knee-deep mud for hours and hours to reach the ocean.
Having just come off of the river, what are some of your top takeaways that you've really learned on your experience?
When we planned the trip, we didn't really know where the river ended up. We'd spent a lot of time in the wilderness sections of Utah and Colorado kayaking and rafting, but we'd heard that the river didn't reach the sea, but we didn't really realize what that meant until we came here and saw it. And it means that there's hundreds of thousands of acres that once had water flowing through them, and all of that is dry now except for a select few parts, less than 10% of the original wetlands.
You can really see the difference between these places that have just even a little bit of water and there's so many birds, and then there's these areas that we hiked through with just mile after mile after mile of tamarisk thickets, which is an invasive species, and that contrast is so striking that even that tiny amount of agricultural wastewater basically can make that big of a difference in restoring the delta.
From your perspective, is the delta the most significant environmental issue that you saw on this journey?
Absolutely. I think any water we can get down here is going to make a huge difference in terms of giving a wide variety of species habitat and really helping to bring the delta back to something closer to what it used to be.
It's definitely the low-hanging fruit on the Colorado in terms of making a big difference. I mean, it's worth noting that 90% of the water in the river is diverted before it even hits Morelos Dam here, before it even goes into Mexico. So it's not like the problem starts here at the diversion of Morelos Dam. I mean, you guys know that, obviously. It was hard for us to picture what the delta would be like before we came down here. And so I'm sure it's hard for you all in Washington, D.C. to picture what it's like out in the Mexican desert. But try and imagine, what if the Potomac, somebody just completely diverted every bit of water in the Potomac, and it was just cracked mud flats and filled it with invasive species. How would that be as a place to go recreate in, paddle in, and walk around next to? So if you can just imagine, your local river completely dewatered, how would that have an impact in the local community? And that's exactly what's happening down here in the Delta.
Well, that is a really good visual comparison. doing good work, and we appreciate the conversation.
Thanks for taking the time, and we hope that this issue remains at the forefront of all the negotiations that are going on with Mexico right now.
The Delta stands as one of the greatest environmental issues in North America today. But as Will and Zach discussed in the video, the issues do not start at the Mexican border. Due to the diversions throughout the basin, from the damming of Glen Canyon, the creation of Lake Powell, to the many straws that suck water from the river to municipalities across the Southwest, the Colorado River faces incredible pressure from 7 southwestern states and the 30 million people that rely on it. Today we look at the river's issues here at home, here in the Rockies. Colorado is known as the headwaters state. From high in the Rockies of Colorado, snow melt and runoff feed some hundreds of streams and rivers and support millions of people. Last night we heard from Secretary of the Department of the Interior Ken Salazar and Director of the U.S. Geological Survey Marcia McNutt on the challenges of managing the river basin for the Department of the Interior. The challenges are tall and they abound, but they are not unsolvable. As part of the concluding section of this year's State of the Rockies report card, our 5 student researchers have laid out 5 separate actions to ensure a healthy and viable river basin for the next generation. Now I'll turn it over to them to quickly cover their research focus over the last year and their action regarding the future of the Colorado River Basin.
Hi, my name is Sally Harden. I'm a senior here at Colorado College. I'm an environmental policy major, and I was a researcher for the summer 2011 State of the Rockies project. My section focused on dams, diversions, and water use. So currently there is a serious supply and demand imbalance in the Colorado River system. Rapidly growing urban populations are contributing to skyrocketing municipal demand. Yet agricultural users, which currently claim around 80% of Colorado River water, hold most of the senior water rights due to the Western water system of prior appropriation. There are increasing users entering this already over-allocated system, including Native Americans now quantifying reserved water rights and increasing cases of in-stream flows or water for the environment. My section looked at the relationship between the 2 biggest users, agriculture and municipalities, and analyzed various solutions for correcting the supply and demand imbalance based on their social, environmental, and economic costs and benefits. These options include further infrastructure creation, water conservation and reuse strategies, and water transfers such as water banking. Therefore, my proposed action for the Colorado River Basin is that we recognize the finite limits of the river supplies and pursue a crash course in conservation and water redistribution that sustains current users while leaving water in the river.
My name is Warren King. I'm also a senior environmental policy major here at CC and worked for the State of the Rockies project this summer. I focused on the law and policy of the river. The law of the river is comprised of over 30 independent pieces of legislation and court opinions, making it one of the most highly regulated rivers in the world. It was my job this summer to read through these documents and assess whether the law of the river has the inherent flexibility necessary to deal with 21st century issues. I did this through an analysis of current issues on the river. I looked at the law and the legislation that has led to these problems. I specifically addressed environmental issues, Native American water rights issues, Mexican water rights issues, and the debate over an upper basin delivery obligation reading of the 1922 Compact. In the end, I determined that the law of the river is neither inherently rigid or flexible. Instead, it is as flexible as the contracting parties allow it to be. With that in mind, I came up with this action: to modify and amend the law of the river to build in cooperation and flexibility.
My name is Ben Tabor. I'm a senior physics major here at Colorado College. And I looked to answer the question wondering if America's playground is under threat. So I was looking at the relationship between recreation and water and the future of recreation in the basin. Recreation is incredibly important. In 2010, private earnings in the basin states due to recreation and tourism were 3% higher than private earnings in the rest of the country. And so this is a big economic source in the basin. Through this, I found that sustainable development of timber, mineral, and renewable energy sources can coexist with national forests and parks, ski areas, and wild rivers that boost the economy in this region. And I found that environmental protection and economic development are not mutually exclusive. There's a saying that if the fish are happy, the rafters are happy. And so I came up with the action that we need to embrace and enshrine basin-wide systems thinking in the region's management of water, land, flora and fauna, agriculture, and human settlements.
Good afternoon. My name is Natalie Triedman, and I was also a project researcher this past summer. I'm a global health major, and I focused on environment and ecological issues in the basin. Diversions that send water from the Colorado River across the western United States have had devastating consequences for the water quality and ecology throughout the Colorado River. Political and public recognition has gradually increased throughout the years, but to simply put these concerns on the political agenda really isn't enough. The current situation of decreasing water supply and increasing water demand in the Colorado River Basin really requires a fundamental shift in our discourse so that we provide new ways of thinking about water supply strategies that don't jeopardize environmental needs. So I looked at water quality and ecology, specifically invasive and endangered species in the basin, and then looked at ways that that law throughout the Colorado River Basin can help protect these endangered resources. And so with those conclusions, my fourth action was to give nature a firm standing in law, administration, and use of water in the basin.
Hi, I'm Carson McMurray, a senior environmental science major. I also was a project researcher this summer. And my section focused on the effects of climate change on the Colorado River Basin. As you can see on this slide, the Colorado River Basin will have significantly less surface water available by the mid-21st century. This is primarily due to warm temperatures affecting the snowpack that provides 80% of the water for the Colorado River. In addition, dust on snow and potential wildfires could exacerbate this problem. In light of this, the state of the Rockies has suggested that the decision makers adopt a flexible and adaptive management approach on a decade-long basis to deal with past, present, and projected future variability of climate and hydrology.
I'm Professor Walt Hecox. I'm the faculty director of the Colorado College State of the Rockies project, and delighted with how the conference has gone thus far. We are honored to have Governor Hickenlooper here, and I've been told several times he likes short introductions, and it will be short. And we indeed have a unique governor, a geologist turned brewpub pioneer, who never ran for office, even student council. Before he was elected mayor of Denver in 2003, he was then elected governor of Colorado in November 2010. He took office 2 months later, and his ambition for the state is even bigger than his name, drawing from a diverse background. And as an exploration geologist and restaurateur, he is bringing incredibly creative leadership to the state with boundless energy. I don't know whether this is the 6th or 7th appearance yet today. And in the past, he said that Denver would not be Denver without West Slope Colorado River water. And this is key to the leadership that he can provide as governor at a really critical time when some fundamental decisions have to be made, some of what we've seen here, about what the river will be for the students in the audience today. And it's really up to him and his administration and the rest of us to start to sort those decisions out. So we're delighted that he could be here and talk about youth and the future of Colorado's water.
Thank you, Dr. Hickenlooper, and you should be very proud of the whole program and the work that those students have done. It's very, very impressive. I know Jill Tiefenthaler is not here, but she would be proud as well. You know, I want to make sure I had those comments in terms of Denver and its relationship to the West Slope water are fully clear in context, because you might have taken it the wrong way. What I've relentlessly, when I first got elected mayor of Denver in 2003, what I tried to convince people was that by them using less water and keeping more water on the West Slope, they had a direct benefit. In other words, the more water that stays on the West Slope, the better it is for people that live in Denver and Colorado Springs and Fort Collins and Pueblo, that our Front Range communities have a direct benefit by maintaining and, if possible, expanding those in-stream flows on the West Slope. And it's not so much just the skiing or whitewater rafting, it's traditional ranching. It's all those things that make Colorado, Colorado. That's why a home along the Front Range is worth 25% more than that same sized home in the similar development in Kansas City or Indianapolis. Now, I know I'm probably offending some people out there. I didn't want to step on any Indiana toes or Missouri toes. We know in the next 40 years, somewhere around 4 or 5 million more people will be in Colorado. And we know that there's no single silver bullet for this challenge. We know we're not going to develop our way out of this crisis any more than we can completely conserve our way out of this crisis. In other words, you saw the pictures of the dam that Will and Zach described. You know, when you get south of there is clearly no water. So bigger, better dams aren't going to be the ultimate solution to this. They might help us manage the problem, but they're not the solution. And we're also very clear that we're not alone in this. And there are all kinds of ironies, right? I mean, the thing about diversions is once they're in place, all kinds of constituencies become intensely dependent on what are, you know, historically, in terms of a geological sense, relatively recent changes. You know, the Platte River, and I was out there about 3.5 weeks ago I convened the first Crane Summit. We had Governor Brownback from Kansas and Governor Heineman from Nebraska, and we all met in Kearney, Nebraska, to look at the crane migration. They have about 600,000, you know, sandhill cranes go through that part of the sandhills every year. It's the largest animal migration on Earth. And we got in a blind on the Big Bend of the Platte River and watched as roughly 60,000, 70,000 cranes came in at sunset. It was spellbinding. You can't imagine that. And that's such a beautiful part of the Platte. And I was talking to one of the environmentalists there and describing, asking how low the flow gets, you know, in the November, October, the late part of the year. And he laughed and said, well, you know, now it's not so bad because we've got all that West Slope water. But historically, the Platte never flowed year-round, right? And yet now, if you were to go and tell those folks in Nebraska or those bird watchers, right, that just as you saw how dry the Colorado gets down when it gets into Mexico, that's how dry the Platte used to get in Nebraska before the beginning of the 20th century, at the end of the 19th century. So there are all kinds of short-term historical traditions and long-term historical traditions that are often in conflict. I was invited to Davos, Switzerland at the end of January for the World Economic Forum, and was fascinating. I mean, 2,400 of the either the smartest people from academia, the leaders of the political leaders of the entire world, titans of industry, and water was a huge subject there. I was on one panel there, and we were looking at the nexus between water and food. And one of the panelists was from South Africa, was the minister of water for South Africa, and they said that we must globally produce as much food in the next 40 years as we produced in the last 8,000 years. And if globally we irrigate the way we irrigate today, that increase will require us to double the amount of fresh water we have on this planet, which obviously is not going to happen. Right? We have the state of Colorado, we have our own minister of water, our water czar, I can't call him a water, John Stolp is here, and he's confirmed to me on repeated occasions that we're not going to double the amount of fresh water. And yet we know we have lessons around the world that we can do more with less. Israel and Australia offer us very valuable lessons. Israel's converted almost all of their irrigation to drip irrigation. And that is a higher cost capital-wise when you start, but unbelievably more resourceful, resource conscious in terms of how much water it uses. And they're even beginning to look at certain crops and the utilization of brackish, slightly saline water on certain crops. In Australia, they've consolidated a number of their water provider organizations to really maximize efficiency. They've set up water markets, just like you would have with other commodities, and using innovations in water delivery and instrumentation technology. During their drought years, their gallons per capita per day were as low as 36 gallons per day. This is in urban areas. In Denver, we're so proud, we got down to 160. So we're at 30, and 160, just so we're clear, you know, we made a big effort when I got elected mayor in 2003. We were going to do a full court press on conservation, right? So we cut Denver Water, and they deserve a lot of credit for this. Since 2002, they've cut water consumption by roughly 20%. That's as much as any big city in the United States has done in a non-drought situation. But you know, getting from 160 down to 36, I don't think, I'm going to have a hard time seeing Denver get to 36. It's like reusing your toothbrush water for your family. But I do think we can make dramatically additional efforts to improve that. And I think that's going to be the core of everything we do. We're going to need a level of collaboration, and collaboration at a level of complexity. Just at that point in history where we have the capacity for complexity, right? Look at Facebook and all the social media that is attendant upon it, you know, Foursquare, you go down the list. We need to find out how to harness that and begin looking at some of these previously intractable problems, and a lot of it's just our own self-discipline or our own motivation. But how do we make it joyful? So that people, you know, don't feel it's a burden when they're just behaving responsibly. How do we find a way to give people a kick out of it? And I think that's where youth comes in, right? The one problem I always, you know, I remember my great friend Joyce Mescus, who owns the Tattered Cover. Her mother just passed away, but at the age of, I think, 94. But when her mother was 77, she was standing in front of the mirror one day, and Joyce was walking by, and she saw her mother looking into the mirror at her old, wrinkled face, and she was saying, "But I don't feel old," right? I don't feel old. Well, I don't feel old either. But I know for a fact that the young people on my staff always have a fresher way, a funnier way, and a more interesting way of looking at almost everything. And I spend at least half my life trying to keep up with them, trying to make jokes that they think are funny, unfortunately rare. I think there's an avenue there by which, if we can find ways of using that combination of youthful exuberance and optimism and technology. Within the state, we have a lot of the formal framework to achieve changes, right? We have the Basin Roundtable, the Interbasin Compact Committee. We have the Colorado River Cooperative Agreement, which was just signed between Denver Water and a whole number of West Slope users. groundbreaking, unheard of, that for the first time both water providers on the Front Range are collaborating and talking and figuring out ways to make it work on the other side. And there were, you know, that conservation ethic infused through Denver Water had a huge part to play in building the trust that made that happen. I think that next step is got to be able to take those frameworks and drive conservation to another level. And not conservation. We are going to need some more dams. We're going to need some more ways to manage water. We're going to need innovations in technology. One of my favorite, when I was out with John Stolp in southeast Colorado and looking at some of the dry land farmers who don't irrigate their land, and instead of plowing their ground for their wheat crop, they inject the seeds exactly deep enough so that the natural moisture is just sufficient so that that seed will germinate and sprout. It has to work harder. You know, in the old days, you wanted to plow that soil, turn it over, make it as easy as possible for that seed. Now they have a little stronger, more robust seeds, I guess. But the key is, by not plowing the soil, you save 12% of the moisture needed during the entire gestation, the entire life of that crop. And those kinds of innovations happen at every level. They used to spray the water, and many places they still do spray the water out in irrigation. Some places they still, on the west slope, they still do what they call flood irrigation. They just fill up a field to grow hay and let the water sit there several inches deep. So, you know, just inviting maximum evaporation is lunacy for something that is as precious as water. I think that ultimately these kinds of innovations, you know, finding different ways of growing crops with less water, more resistant strains of wheat or corn that you know are more drought tolerant and can grow more rapidly with limited water are going to be part of it. But I keep coming back again and again. Our discipline around how much water we use is going to be the foundation of everything we do. And if there's one thing that kids could take on and begin addressing it and tie it into climate change, tie it into, you know, shaking some of the more resistant of my peers to how rapidly the world is changing, I think it's about how we conceive of water. One suggestion I would say would be, you know, approach your water utility down here in Colorado Springs and see if they are willing to do some sort of a off-the-wall public relations campaign around conservation of water. When Chip Sparrow was the head of Denver Water and I first became mayor, we sat down and he came up, you know, I was pushing him as hard as I can. When I was mayor, I got to appoint the board to Denver Water. So it was, you know, Chips and I had a great, very rapid, close friendship. And he was very, I mean, he loved it. He threw himself into this full-scale marketing. And so he'd say, they had radio ads and you know, save water, shower with a friend. Or we had beer coasters coming out you know, that were printed one side with the brand of the beer, and then the other side would be some way of using water, right? Well, I won't even go into them. Some of them were slightly off color. I'll leave those to your imagination. Anyway, let me just say that some people say this is an impossible task. And, you know, and I haven't told the story in ages, but when I was campaigning, when I first ran for mayor, I'd never run for anything. I had no support system. Everyone said I could never win. And I carried this clipping until it was completely tattered from the Denver Post that talked about a professor of public speaking at the University of Wyoming up in Laramie. And she was telling her class the importance of using opposites when you speak publicly. If you talk about the worst of times, you talk about the best of times. If you talk about the agony, you talk about the ecstasy. And the words gain emotional impact by being close together. And she asked her class, what's the opposite of despair? The kid raised her hand and goes, joy? She goes, exactly. You want people to feel despair, use joy in the same sentence. And the words gain emotional impact by being close together. Then she said, what's the opposite of woe? And a kid way in the back goes, giddy up. And I think ultimately that is the opposite of woe. So your challenge, all the young people out there, is to giddy up. Thank you. Have you got a way of doing questions? Do they have any questions? Maybe.
Time for questions.
I don't know. I'm not in charge of my schedule. There's a question.
Several students who have questions will entertain those. Oh, come down to the microphone.
Governor Hickenlooper.
Yeah.
Once water is piped across the continental divide from the western slope to the eastern slope, it will never return to the original water basin. In what ways is Colorado acting now to kind of combat this serious barrier towards long-term sustainability?
You mean, how do we get water to go back to the west slope?
Well, not exactly that, but how do we plan to deal with this issue in the future?
Well, I think the conservation is the key to it all, right? How do we make sure that we don't need to take any more water than is absolutely necessary from the west slope? And I think we are rapidly approaching that point where we're going to get to the point where we say not one more drop. When I was a field geologist, it was always an exciting thing if you'd had a couple beers and you were up on the continental divide to see whether you could send fluids both to, well, that's another side I probably should not even get into. But the key to that is all the thing. I mean, it's about conservation, right? And how do we use the water more wisely so we don't have to take it from the west slope in the first place?
Any other students? Right here, and then you.
Hi, I wanted to ask if there are anything being done to replenish the underground water reserves that we have, like under our country, like aquifers and that kind of thing.
So that's a great question. In certain places they are finally beginning to do that. They didn't do it for decades. Denver Water there's a wonderful aquifer. It's kind of the far western feather edge of the Ogallala system of aquifers that comes under Denver, and they don't use it. They have not allowed anyone to drill into that aquifer and use it for water for ages, and those few businesses that still use that aquifer consider it precious. I know this for a fact because at one time when I was in the brew pub business, we had to build a bottling plant at the site of the old Silver State Laundry. And the Silver State Laundry has water rights adjudicated dating back to I think it was 1884. So we could use this artesian well water to make our beer. When we stopped using that as a brewery, we moved somewhere else, they turned it into lofts. No one will ever be able to use that water again for industrial. They couldn't transfer it to somewhere else. So there is, at least in Colorado, a great recognition that groundwater is precious. Now, the place where that's really being challenged is in southern Metro Denver, Douglas County, where they've been using well water for pretty close to 30 years now, almost 40 years, at a high level, and they can see the drop in their wells. The key to solving that is to begin integrating all the different water systems. There are, last time I checked, 14 or 15 different water providers, James? I don't know if you remember that. James Eklund, who's my ace, other water expert. But there are all these little water providers down there that don't talk to each other and don't like each other. And if Denver, when we have a big flood, like last 2 years, we've had tons of extra water. A lot of it just flows out of the state when it should be going back and replenishing some of those aquifers. So you're right on. That's something we should be doing. Just starting to do it, but a good idea.
Governor, I'm sorry, I won't embarrass you and ask you about history or anything. I think you remember. Why has everyone forgotten the SWSI report? It was 2004, and we spent $500,000. The next governor spent $150,000 because he didn't believe the report. The report says that we're 630,000 acre feet short in the year 2030. What can you do about that without changing the law and using reuse, retreatment, and things which are illegal under our present system?
Well, and again, I think I'll go back through it again. Conservation is the first place you're going to have to start. And well, conservation has, everyone tells me, they say, well, we did so much conservation, we can't go any further.
When the river's dry, you can't, what have you got to conserve? That's the,
Well, you start conserving before the river's dry, that's the idea.
Yeah.
The trick there is to do it at the beginning of the year rather than at the end of the year. And retreatment, ultimately, we are already retreating, right?
Yeah, only in certain cases, not residentially, not reuse devices. There are millions of things which you could do which are illegal.
Right, but obviously some of those laws are going to change, right? What has to happen is people have to become, there has to be sufficient science and documentation and public relations so that people feel comfortable with it. Right now,
it's illegal in Mesa County or Maricopa County to build a house without a reuse device. And it's legal there, and it's illegal here in El Paso County. Go figure.
You might have to talk to your county commissioners.
Oh, well.
Thank you all. I appreciate it.
We're here just to talk briefly about the next project we have lined up, which is a new field research element that State of the Rockies just added on this year.
So last winter, Zach Podmore and I spent 4 months kayaking down the Colorado River from source to sea. And you guys kind of saw what we did in that video there. We saw some pretty pristine country and some pretty degraded country. And we saw the Colorado River diverted entirely out of its riverbed. But the problem doesn't start in Mexico, as Brendan was talking about. And even the Springs gets the majority of its water from the Colorado. So we're in the process of developing a big online interactive map. So we're going to start at Rocky Mountain National Park this summer and go down to Lake Powell probably. We're going to be doing a lot of interviews and taking a lot of photos and videos and uploading them to this map. So you should watch the Rockies project this next summer. We're going to be doing a lot of good stuff.
One more thing, sorry. We're switching back and forth here. This is possible thanks to a generous grant that's just been given to State of the Rockies project. And we're going to be able to hire a few positions. Not many students around here now, but we're looking for a student to come with us for the whole time to help out with logistics, and also a few volunteers to come from anywhere from 2 to 10 days. So if you're interested in that, or if you know a student who it might be, pick up an information sheet that's located at the back door. Come and talk to us afterwards. All right, here's Molly Mugglestone, who is who teaches at Western State University in Gunnison and is a spokesperson for Protect the Flows, which is a nonprofit working to help the river. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Hi. I realize everybody probably had to get back to class. So I will be brief, and I thank you guys for the opportunity to talk. I think one of the reasons that I was put at this point in the agenda is we are an advocacy organization and an illustration of advocacy at work. So I really liked the 5 action steps. I wrote down all of them. We're doing most of them or advocating for them in the work that we do at Protect the Flows. And so I just wanted to highlight some of the advocacy that we have been doing in my organization to protect primarily recreational flows. We're a coalition of about 370 businesses that depend on the Colorado River for their economic viability. So we're talking about recreation and tourism as part of the conversation around protecting the river. Sometimes recreation and tourism isn't necessarily given as much airtime as agriculture and municipalities' use, which, you know, it shouldn't, because 30 million people depend on the river, and we need food. But we also do recreate, and I think Will and Zach can attest to the importance of having the ability to do that. And 800,000 jobs in the 7 basin states rely on the Colorado River for that type of economic business. And I think it was Ben who talked a little bit about the ties between recreation and that recreation, the river, and the economy, and that those things don't have to necessarily not work together. So that's basically our perspective as well as businesses that rely on the river. So we have businesses in all 7 Colorado Basin states. We've got small businesses like the person who operates a coffee shop in Dolores, all the way up to Aspen Ski Company and Patagonia and Smith Optics. So we've got all kinds of businesses that have signed on to our effort, which is about a year old. So we've just kind of started operating our efforts. You know, basically our bottom line is the Colorado River, so you can kind of see the pun there. We're talking about the economic viability again. The economic future of the West is tied to Colorado River that flows strong and beckons people to our communities. The outdoor recreation economy contributes about $730 billion to the U.S. economy and supports 6.5 million jobs across the country. Within the basin, it's about 800,000 jobs. So this is something that is meaningful to people who not only like to go and fly fish on the rivers, but whose jobs depend on healthy rivers. And Governor Hickenlooper mentioned the tie to the Western Slope and the value of recreation and tourism in our state. And so he definitely gets it, and we're really happy about that. I just put this one in here. One of our businesses is Patagonia, and they're one of the larger ones that are on our effort. They have over 700 employees. And then you have, I was talking to Will and Zach about within their expeditions, if they had met Sarah, she's a guide in Moab and has become a really good advocate. So again, that advocacy piece, we're just really trying to get those voices of people who depend on the river into the conversation, and I'll tell you quickly how we've done that. We have organized, so for students who are thinking about a career in advocacy, you go do your traditional political organizing. I spent all last summer collecting signatures of businesses around the 7 basin states and making our arguments to these businesses and bringing our perspective to them. And many of them signed on because they definitely got the relevancy of the river for their business. So we have done a letter, we've done 2 trips to DC. We've met with Secretary Salazar, Ann Castle, members of Congress. And so, again, our message is resonating with decision makers. And really what we want to do is just kind of hammer home what Governor Hickenlooper was talking about, which is that we do need to keep water in the rivers enough to make them sustainable. Environmental flows are really important to the work of many of our businesses that spend all day on the river and recreate on it and depend on its environmental viability. We have spoken about the Flaming Gorge pipeline. Diversions have been mentioned here. We have had kind of a mini campaign within our campaign. About 140 Colorado businesses have signed on against the Flaming Gorge pipeline. That goes back to, I can't remember which action step it was, but seeing things as system-wide in terms of the water that might be diverted from the Green River is going to affect Western Slope businesses. And we've been really effective in getting county commissioners to sign on to our opposition to the Flaming Gorge pipeline. Mesa County, some of your traditional kind of conservative places see this pipeline as expensive and not really the right solution. So we've been campaigning around that this summer. And like I said, we've got a variety of conservative as well as your typical sort of liberal politicians on board in opposition to that Flaming Gorge pipeline. So that's one of the things that we've been working on. I know you guys have seen this. You know the direness of the situation. So what we're doing in that advocacy and what our message is that we want to protect jobs, we want to protect the way of life, and we want to think about solutions that are common sense. That's why we have come out against the Flaming Gorge pipeline, is something that we don't feel is as necessarily as common sense. And the other big thing that we've been doing is trying to insert our business perspective into the Basin study. And I don't know, I apologize, I live in Gunnison and teach at Western, so I wasn't here yesterday, but I don't know if the Basin study has been talked about very much at the conference, but that's really an opportunity under Secretary Salazar, where he's leading that with the Bureau of Reclamation, to come up with solutions for the next 50 years. And we really are stressing common sense solutions that don't cost billions of dollars. Shipping icebergs is not the way to solve this problem, and that's our perspective. We would like to see better urban conservation. Governor Hickenlooper talked about some examples from Denver Water. There are really good examples, and we want to see those really driven from the leadership of people like the governor, like Secretary Salazar, and so that's really what we're pushing for in our messages. Water banks have been mentioned here today, so we support solutions in that Basin study that really look at these three areas. Those are our main solutions that we've supported. We also have we've put in our own proposal with American Whitewater that talks about monitoring and tracking certain parts of the river that are currently not necessarily being, we don't have enough data around what's going on in the rivers in those really important places. So our proposal was also submitted to the Bureau of Reclamation, and so ours, along with some of those proposed solutions, are what we're doing. And so our goal is just to ensure that the basin study accurately counts for the future supply and demand on the river and proposes effective and pragmatic solutions that keep enough water in the river to support the Southwest's recreation economy and the health of the river itself. So it really does kind of take some of what you guys talked about in terms of your actions. It takes what the governor mentioned and puts it into practice. And so that's our effort, is trying to sort of hold people accountable, hold the leaders accountable to the things that they say in terms of conservation, and really bringing that home with the economic message. So we've got a really good Facebook presence. It's a great place to go for any water news. We're kind of like an RSS feed for water news. If you sign up with us on Facebook, you'll get all the great articles, and just kind of keeping track of our efforts. And if you want to get involved, if you want to stay in touch with us, definitely find us on Facebook and Twitter. I ended with, what drives our work is policy and advocacy and really having those conversations with leaders, the people who are making the decisions. In this picture is Salazar, obviously, as well as Ann Castle. So that's our goal. But we also, always like to remind people of the reason that we exist, which is to protect the water and to protect the river. And that's Sarah, one of our great advocates. So I appreciate the time. I know most people had to go, but I appreciate being able to tell you a little bit about one particular advocacy effort that's going on within your state, as well as all of the other basin states for the Colorado River. Thank you so much.
State of the Rockies project, I'd like to thank Molly and Protect the Flows. They're clearly doing some great work. We'd also like to thank all of you that stuck around, listened to all the presentations. We'll be having 2 more sessions this afternoon at 4:30. As Will and Zach mentioned before, artist and writer Stephen Trimble will be giving a presentation titled Bargaining for Eden in Search of Visionary Conservation in the Colorado Plateau. And then this evening at 7:30, we have a session entitled Colorado's Stake in the Colorado River Basin, with officials from the Colorado Water Conservation Board and the Colorado River Water Conservation District. So we hope you can join us for the other events this evening. Thank you very much.